Greetings, YouTube. Today we'll be discussing Thomas More's Utopia. This is from Penguin Classics, and this was translated with an introduction and notes by Paul Turner. It's not a very particularly large book. And this is interesting because it's the first classic that I have read in a very long time. I have not read many in the past 20 years. I just kind of moved out of that phase of my reading, I guess, and then I found this at a used bookstore, and that might have been at Goodwill. And the title, of course, intrigued me, Utopia, the concept of the perfect place, which makes me think of the Yogi Bear cartoon, which name escapes me at the moment. Always searching for the perfect place in their flying ark. And since I don't read Latin, it was nice that I found a copy that was translated into English. This is a 16th century treatise on politics. Now, Thomas More wanted to write a book about politics in the 16th century. And when you live in a monarchy under Henry VIII, you may want to walk lightly. Because if you say something that he doesn't like, or you don't say something he likes, you're going to end up dead, which is actually what happened to Thomas More. He refused to swear an oath to Henry after the upheaval because Henry wanted a divorce so he could marry Anne Boleyn, and More, being a devout Catholic, would not swear. He did not speak out against Henry, but he would not swear allegiance to the new social structure that Henry created with the church and the political environment therein. And eventually went to the headsman's axe for that particular omission. But prior to that, he had not wanted to end up on the headsman's axe, and so he created a fictitious country and a fictitious author who had been there, a traveler, and he created this entire false structure around the place known as Utopia, so that he could discuss both the political structure of modern Europe at the time and the political structure of communism. And this is a scathing indictment of the political structure of the 16th century. It is also, in my opinion, a scathing indictment of communism, which I don't think was More's point. He was a devout Catholic, and he felt that if you followed the teachings of Christ, any truly Christian community would have to be communist, which is an interesting interpretation of it all. Potentially somewhat realistic. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a biblical scholar, but there have been people who have said that capitalism is an anthem to the structures of Christianity. Then those who, of course, think that capitalism is just fine with their prosperity gospel and things like that. And it's essentially just the author, Thomas More, listening to a traveler's tales. That's it. That's the whole book, in its essence. Guy listening to someone talk about another country. A country which is incredibly high class structure, even though it said it doesn't have a class structure. Misogynistic, sexist. They endorse slavery. They don't endorse freedom of speech. You have to be a theist to remain in a country. It's an incredible indictment of just absolute bigotry towards atheism, which is bizarre because the Soviets loved this book. There's a statue put up by the Soviets with Thomas More's name on it because they loved this book so much. How they could read this book and not see how much More despised atheism, I'm not positive. I guess that the easiest person to lie to is yourself. So Utopia, in my opinion, isn't utopic in the least. And, as it suffers from many political philosophies, it would only function if humans don't act like humans. Because if humans act like the way they actually do act, the nation of Utopia would fall in a heartbeat. And you would end up with the structures that we have in the world today, and existed in the 16th century Europe. The squabbling, the pettiness, the classism, the poor, the rich, the exploitation, things like that. But it is a delightful book. It's very entertaining, and he is very successful at hiding the truth of his mission. In fact, one of his contemporaries said he couldn't figure out why Moore was getting so much credit for the book, but all he was doing was telling something that someone else said. Someone who bought the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker, and really believed that Moore was just quoting a traveler who'd been to the other side of the world and found the nation of Utopia. Interesting. The notion of Utopia would, I think, be off the western coast of South America, I think. Yeah, I think it would be if you look from like the opposite side of the pole from where, opposite side of the planet from where Europe was. I'm not positive. But he also just discussed structures that I think were interesting in that even though he was creating this fictitious place, it was very much a stepchild of Europe. It bore no resemblance whatsoever to the nations that actually existed in the region he was discussing, which is a testament to how complex human beings can be. That we can have political, social, and cultural structures so different that even though a great author and a very smart man did not conceive of things that were even close. Because the actual South American peoples were vastly different than the Europeans. And that variety is one of the things that makes the world go round. So if you enjoy classics, if you enjoy political treaties, if you like an interesting look at a snapshot of how the thinking was being undertaken by the I can never say that word right, of the 16th century, this is definitely a book you should read. Again, it's not a particularly big book, and since it's a Penguin class, you could probably pick it cheap in the secondary market. I imagine there are probably a lot of these copies kicking around from college courses. But it was a fun read. I really enjoyed it. I think it was both an indictment of communism and of the European politics of the 16th century. I have a hard time imagining how anyone could read this and think it was a positive statement about communism. I really do. But apparently someone did, including the Soviets, who we think would be experts on communism. But, so, go forth, get yourself a copy, and read this if you have an interest in politics the way I do.